To start this section off, we're going to talk about sort of a different way to factor. That's really only going to be useful that if we're dealing with problems that have to do with a circle, which we'll get to in a second in this section. And that's something called completing the square. Basically, when we complete the square, we're starting off with something that looks like this: x squared plus bx. So just a 1 in front of the x squared and then any number in front of the x. So this is what we're given with. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take whatever this number is, b. So first is write x squared plus bx. Whatever this number is, we're going to take it and divide it by 2. Actually, let's put a plus minus sign here. So this can be x squared plus this number or x squared minus this number. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this b, we're dividing it by 2, and squaring it, we're adding it to it, and then we're also going to subtract that number. So this right here, just we're adding b squared over 2, b over 2 squared, and subtracting b over 2 squared. So really, this is just 0. So this piece is still equal to this piece. They're the same thing. Here we're just adding this 0 to it. And the reason we're doing that is that this piece right here is able to be factored into x plus minus b over 2 squared, and then we still have this minus b over 2 squared. So when we're starting with something like this, x squared plus minus b over x, these can actually all be equal signs. This is equal to this, which is equal to this. So here's just our starting point. Here we just add and subtract this b over 2 squared, and then we can show that this part could be factored into x plus minus b over 2 squared. So with a simple example, let's start with something like x squared plus 6x. Okay, here's step 1. We have, this is now we're going to have a plus sign. Oh, and down here, this plus minus sign. It means if we start with a plus sign, this is also going to be a plus sign in these parentheses. And say if we started with a minus sign, we would have a minus sign in these parentheses. So since we have a plus sign here, this is going to be a plus sign, this is going to be a plus sign. If we had a minus sign here, this would be a minus sign, this would be a minus sign. Anyway, the first step says, so here's our b. We want to take our b divided by 2 and then square it and then add and subtract that. So plus this number divided by 2 squared minus that number divided by 2 squared. Okay, so what does this equal? X squared plus 6x. Well, this is just 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and then we're squaring that, so 9. And let's just rewrite this as 6 over 2 squared. So this piece right here, that's this piece right here. So we're going to factor this. So we don't necessarily need to remember this b over 2 thing. We can just factor this normally. So we have a 1 in front of our x. So we're going to do this. We still have this minus 6 over 2 squared. XX. Okay, what are the numbers that multiply up to 9 but add to 3? Or sorry, add to 6, and that's going to be 3. So plus 3 plus 3. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. So this is just the same thing as x plus 3 squared minus 6 over 2 squared. But that's just equal to x plus 3 squared. 6 over 2 is 3. Squared is 9, so minus 9. That's the same thing as this. So remember our b here was 6. So we started off x squared, plus minus bx. That was this piece right here. X squared plus 6x. So here's our b. So our final answer should have been x plus b over 2. So here's x plus, and b over 2 is 3, so that's right, squared, and then minus that same number, so minus 9. So these are, here's an example, and here's kind of like all the steps that we did. And so the reason why we're doing that is for, let's do this on a new page. What we want to do is, well, first let's talk about what is the equation of a circle. So say if we have a graph, here's a circle, here's the center, so let's say this is H, this is K, so this point in the middle is H comma K. the equation of this circle is going to be y minus k squared plus x minus h squared is equal to r squared. And r is the number, so the radius. That distance is going to be r. So this circle has this equation. And so the example that we want to do is, suppose we're given this equation. Where's it at? Here. X squared plus 2x plus y squared minus 4x is equal to 4. And I guess, so this right here, this is called the standard form. And so the question is that we're given this, which we're told is a circle, and we want to turn this into the standard form. So we want to turn this into standard form. So okay, so we want to make it look like this, which it doesn't look like this right now. And the way we do that is we use the completing the square technique, which we did on the previous page. And so what we're going to do is completing the square in two different parts. So here's x squared plus 2x. We're going to do the completing the square on this piece, and then y squared minus 4x. Sorry, this needs to be a y. Y squared minus 4y. And then we're going to do completing the square on that piece. So let's just start with the x one. So remember the completing the square, what we do is we take our b term, divide it by 2, and then square it, and then add it and subtract it. So this is going to turn into x squared plus 2x. This divided by 2, that's going to be 1. And so we're going to do plus 1 squared minus 1 squared. So this is like the b over 2. So the same thing that we done on the previous page. Now let's do the same thing here. Y squared minus 4y. We're going to take this b divided by 2, so 4. So we're going to add that number, so 4 over 2, which is just 2. So we're adding 2 squared, subtracting 2 squared. And then we equals 4. Okay, so now what we got to do is, just like in the completing the square part, these 3 right here are going to be able to factor, and these little 3 right here are going to be able to be factored. So what is this? This is rewrite this. This is x squared plus 2x plus 1. And then we have minus 1. Oh, there's got to be a plus sign here. Plus y squared minus 4y plus 4 minus 4 is equal to 4. Okay, so again, this is going to be able to be factored, and this is going to be able to be factored. So how do we factor this one? Well, this one's going to factor into x plus 1 squared. Do we still have this minus 1? And this one right here is going to be factored into y minus 2 squared. And we still have this minus 4 equals 4. So again, if we were to factor this, let's factor both these off on the side. X squared plus 2x plus 1. So there's a 1 in front of the x squared, so we write 2 sets of parentheses, x, x, and what numbers multiply up to 1 but add to 2, and that's going to be plus 1, and this is just the same thing as x plus 1 squared. Now again for this one, y squared minus 4y plus 4. So we have a 1 in front of our squared term, so we're just going to put 2 parentheses. And what multiplies up to 4 but adds up to minus 2, and that's going to be minus 2 minus 2. Minus 2 times minus 2 is positive 4. Add these, you get negative 4, but this is just the same thing as y minus 2 squared. And then here we just rewrote our minus 1 term, we rewrite our minus 4 term. Okay, so now we're almost look like this. So all we need to do is just put this number and this number to the other side. So let's add 1, add 4, so then add 1, add 4. We still have our x plus 1 squared. These ones cancel. We still have our y minus 2 squared. These cancel. Now 4 plus 1 plus 4, which is 9. So now we're in the standard form. We have, y minus a number, x minus an h. Here this h is, so let's talk about that. Let's say, what are all these variables? So what is, in this problem right here, what is k, what is h, and what is r? So let's start with r. This is the r squared. Okay? Which tells us that r is equal to 3. If we just take the square root of both sides. Here we have y minus 2, so y minus k. That means our k is 2. But here we have x plus 1, and it says we need to have x minus h. So when we have a plus 1 here, when it needs to say minus h, that means that in this situation our h is equal to negative 1. So our r is 3, k is 2, and our h is minus 1. That corresponds to all this. And then this right here is just the standard form. Okay, so it takes care of the circle problem. So the last couple things from this section. The midpoint, and we'll start with the midpoint formula. And then also the distance formula. So suppose we have, here's just a graph. Here's a point, AB, or let's not call it AB. Let's call this one's going to be the point x1, y1. And here's a point over here, x2, y2. So the midpoint, so say if we draw a line between these 2 points. The midpoint is the point that's exactly in the middle. And so the midpoint is equal to this. You add the x's, divide by 2, and then we add the y's and divide by 2. Okay, so this up here, that's the midpoint, which is the point exactly in the middle between these two. Now for the distance, that's going to equal the square root. So we subtract the x's and square them, plus, and then we subtract the y's and square them. And what the distance means is just what it says, is this the distance from this point to this point. Okay, so let's do an example with that. Suppose we have these 2 points, 2, 3, and 4, 5. Okay, let's start with the midpoint. Well, the midpoint formula says we just add the 2 x values, divide by 2, and then add the 2 y values and divide by 2. So we're adding the x values, so 2 plus 4, dividing by 2, and then we're adding the y values, 3 plus 5, dividing by 2. So here's 2 plus 4, which is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And here's 3 plus 5, which is 8, divided by 2, which is 4. So this is the midpoint. All right, so now let's talk about what's the distance between these 2 points. Okay, well, what's the distance formula say? It says we have to subtract the x values and square them. So 2 minus 4, and then plus, subtract the y values and square them. 3 minus 5 squared. Okay, so what does this equal? Here we have 2 minus 4, which is minus 2, squared. Here we have 3 minus 5, which is again minus 2, and we're squaring it. And minus 2 squared is 4, so we're going to have 4. Again, minus 2 squared is 4, so plus 4, which is equal to 8. And so now we want to simplify the square root. So remember, when we simplify it, we rewrite whatever's on the inside and break it up. So this is 4 times 2, 2 times 2, and then we have a 2. And then we're able to, whatever we have a pair of, we can bring that out. So here's a pair of 2's. So we can bring out the 2, and whatever's left just goes on the inside. So this is going to be 2 root 2. So here, all we're doing is just, we're taking the points, we're plugging it into the midpoint formula up here, and we're taking these same points and plugging it into this distance formula. So up here we have these x1, x2s. In this problem we called this one, this was x1, this was y1, and this was x2, y2. And all we did was just plug all these points, the x1, y1, x2, y2, and these formulas up here, and then we simplified. Okay, so our next problem this is going to be graphing using a XY table. So what this means is, we're given, let's just do this with an example. Say we want to graph this function, y is equal to 2x squared plus 1. And for this, we want to use an XY table. So first, let's draw a graph. Let's put some ticks on. So we're going to make an XY table. And so we're just going to pick some X values to plug in here to get Y values. And then we're going to take those points and plug it on this graph. So let's plug in a couple of values. Let's start with some negative ones. How about if we plug in -2? If we plug in -2 for X, we're going to get 2 times -2 squared plus 1. So again, -2 squared, that's 4. 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 plus 1 is 9. So we get 9. Let's plug in -1. We get 2 minus 1 squared plus 1. So just plug in a -1 for the minus right here. So we get 2 minus 1 squared plus 1. So that's 1. 2 times 1 is 2. Add 1, you get 3. Okay, so let's plug in 0. We get 2 times 0 squared plus 1, which is just equal to 1. Now let's plug in +1. So 2 times 1 squared plus 1, that's going to be 3. And if we plug in 2, so 2 times 2 squared plus 1, that's going to be equal to +9. So we have all these points. This is going to give us the point -2, 9. This is the point -1, 3. Here's the point 0, 1. 1, 3. And then 2, 9. So let's take all these points and plug it on the graph. We're going to need more y. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so -2, 9. So here's -2, 9 up here. Then -1, 3. So -1, 3. 0, 1 is right here. 1, 3. And then 2, 9. And then this is something to remember. Whenever we have an x squared, that shape is called a parabola, which is like a U. So when we connect these dots, we want to connect them with the U shape, like this. Let's put little arrows up here. And so using an XY table, that's how we would, in this case, that's how we would graph this problem. Okay, so the last question from this section, so we're given an equation. We want to find the x and y intercepts. So graphically what this means, say we have a graph, the graph does whatever, does something like this. An x-intercept is where it touches the x-axis. So here's your x-axis, here's your y-axis, touches here, touches here. So these points, these are all x-intercepts. We have an x-intercept here, an x-intercept here, and then an x-intercept right here. It's where the graph touches the x-axis. And a y-intercept, well, here's one right here. It's where the graph touches the y-axis. Okay? So suppose we're given a graph, or just an equation. We'll find it for this one. This isn't the same graph of this one I'm drawing. This is x squared, okay, minus 11x plus 18. This graph does not look like this. This is just for an illustration. So suppose we want to find the x and the y intercepts. First, let's call this one just f of x. This equation. So if we look at here, say we want to find the x-intercepts. So this point, here's x, here's an x-intercept, here's an x-intercept. So if we look at actually let's not call this f of x, let's call this one y. So this graph right here is just y. So you see, look at the y value at these x-intercepts. So the y value is how much up and how much down we are. So at all of these points, the y value is 0. So to find the x-intercepts, we set y equal to 0 and solve for x. Again, so why is that? So here's our x-intercept. One right here, and one right here. The y value is 0. Y values mean we go up and we go down. Since this is the y-axis, if we have a positive y value, it's going to be somewhere up here. And if we have a negative y value, it's going to be somewhere down here. But these x-intercepts have 0 y value. They don't go up or down. So to find this x-intercept point, we just set y equal to 0 because there is no y value, or the y value is 0, and then we solve for x. Now similarly for the y-intercept. So here's the y-intercept. See, x values mean we go right and then we go left. This one doesn't go right and it doesn't go left. It only has a y value. So that means our x value is 0. So to find our y-intercept, we do the opposite. We're going to set x equal to 0 and solve for y. So this right here is how we find both the x's and the y-intercepts when given an equation like this. So using these two little properties right here, let's find the x and y-intercepts of this. So let's start with the x-intercepts. Over here it says the x-intercepts, set y equal to 0 and solve for x. So here's y, we're going to set it equal to 0 and then solve for x. But we've solved this equation several times, so we can factor this right-hand side. There's a 1 in front of the x squared, so we just put an x. Okay, so what multiplies up to 18, but then adds up to minus 11, and that's going to be minus 2 minus 9. Minus 2 times minus 9 is 18. Add these two numbers up, you get minus 11. So when we're solving this, this tells us that x is going to be 2, x is going to be 9. So these are our two x-intercepts. So the x-intercept is a point, meaning that the y value is 0 and x is 2, and the y value is 0 and x is 9. So we have two x-intercepts. So our x-intercepts is going to be the point 2, 0 and the point 9, 0. So here's our x-intercepts. So now let's try to find our y-intercepts. So now for our y-intercepts, it says set x equal to 0, solve for y. So we have y equal to set x equal to 0. So we have 0 squared, 11 times 0, plus 18. So that's 0 minus 0, which is a 0, so 18. So that means our y-intercept is going to be the point, so x was 0 and y is 18. So this would be our y-intercept, and these would be both of our x-intercepts.